This happened years ago when I was about 17. I'm 30 now, male for context. When I was a teenager, I lived in Marin County, a quiet suburb just north of San Francisco. However, most of my buddies lived in San Francisco, and most nights of the week, I could be found riding my bicycle back and forth across the Golden Gate Bridge. I enjoyed these long bicycle rides at night. I'd often be as high as a kite, iPod on my favorite playlist, passing by weirdos and street urchins, or admiring the desolate beauty of the bay, Sausalito, and empty Embarcadero. One of my favorite places to ride my bike was through the Presidio. The Presidio is the last neighborhood you pass in San Francisco before making your way onto the Golden Gate Bridge. It's famous for its old, beautiful military housing, an old airfield and hangars that have been converted into a seaside park, and enormous eucalyptus trees and forests. At nighttime, it's dead quiet, and the only people you can see out are late-night Chinese fishermen on the pier down on the water, or people flying down the freeway into the city. Anyways, this one night I was coming back from hanging out with some friends and riding my bike through the Presidio on my way home. I was leisurely gliding my way down the hills when I noticed a single older black car, something like an Oldsmobile, coming up a road perpendicular to the one I was coming down. As I got closer, the black Oldsmobile took a left, blinding me for a moment with its lights as it passed. I didn't think much of it at the time. Here and there you might see a couple cruising to go make out by the bridge, or a car full of kids going to smoke a joint at the old pet cemetery beneath the highway overpass. A few minutes later, I had mostly climbed the hill that took you closer to the entrance of the bridge and looked down on Crissy Field. The road is dark with barely any lights, and I was enjoying looking down towards the water to my right when I heard a car coming up from behind me. I looked behind me and saw the same old black Oldsmobile maybe 20 yards back with its lights off, strangely driving at a slow crawl. I tried to wave them past, but the car just kept on rolling slowly behind me. It was too dark to see who might be driving. The fact that the car had its lights off almost immediately struck me as a red flag, as well as its obvious slow trailing behind me. I gave it a few more yards and tried to wave it past again, but nothing. Spooked, I made a sharp left on my bicycle and began bombing down the hill in the opposite direction of the Oldsmobile. This route would take me back deeper into a more secluded wooded area by the cemetery and air hangars. For a moment I felt relieved, until I heard a screeching of car wheels and glanced behind me to see the black Oldsmobile, lights still off, now passing behind trees coming down the same hill as me. The Oldsmobile had to have made an extremely unusual U-turn, especially considering how narrow the roads are in Presidio. Using all my strength, I pedaled as fast as I could up a small hill and jumped off my bike, throwing it off the edge of the road to the left into some bushes, and quickly jumped off the road to hide. Hanging off the side of a hill, hidden in ivy, I was just below the road. I looked up but couldn't see anything, but I could hear the black Oldsmobile pass. I waited, and a few minutes later I heard the car slowly approaching, no indication from headlights, and then pass by. And again, and again, and again. For nearly 20 minutes or so I hid in the bushes as I heard the Oldsmobile pass back and forth overhead. Finally, I mustered the courage to get back on my bike and ride as fast as I possibly could back to the bridge. In the darkness, listening to myself pant, it felt like forever, but I finally could see the glaring bright lights of the Golden Gate Bridge. But then again I heard the car. I looked behind me to see the Oldsmobile once more trailing me. I smashed and made it to the parking lot of the bridge toll, rode up to the pedestrian sidewalk next to the toll, and got off my bike under the light and chain smoked for a while. I never saw the car pass onto the bridge, nor did I see it again once I made it to Marin.
From 2013 to 2019, I worked in outdoor education at many different summer camps and outdoor education centers in Canada, mostly Ontario, but I did spend a season in the Rocky Mountains. Having grown up going to sleepaway camp and eventually participating in month-long leadership programs with backcountry canoeing components, I was well prepared to lead a group of teen girls from a camp in Georgian Bay on a 2-week camping trip in the Temagami region during my first year as a counselor. The Temagami region is located between North Bay, Sudbury, and Timmins, Ontario. This region is home to many provincial parks, wonderful hiking and canoeing routes, and the Bear Island Indian Reserve. Our route was fairly typical and began in the Whitefish Falls region, ending at Highway 11 after 14 days of paddling, portaging, hiking, and campfire making. We had a satellite phone to check in with our camp director every day, and in case of an emergency, we also had multiple exit points along the route. Until our second to last night, we were having fun and a relatively uneventful time. Besides some mild dehydration and the usual bumps and bruises. Near the end of our trip, we were doing some free camping on the shore of an uninhabited island in Bear Lake that is recognized as part of the Bear Island Indian Reserve. It's a beautiful area, and we were across from the main island that the majority of the 250-person population inhabits. We had put out the fire and gone to bed, when about an hour after falling asleep, I was jarred awake by the sound of a loud motorboat. Obviously, this isn't that weird because it's a large lake and many people use boats to reach the mainland or their homes on secluded islands. However, it was around 11 p.m. and things had been quiet for the last few hours. The motor cut out and I could clearly hear the sound of an argument. It sounded like at least one man and a woman, and they were very angry and yelling at each other, although I couldn't hear anything specific because they were too far offshore. Suddenly, the woman screamed, and I heard a splash into the water, and then complete silence. At this point, I was pretty freaked out and hoping to God that my girls hadn't woken up. But I wasn't that lucky, because I could immediately hear talking from their tents and could tell they were scared. I was about to unzip my door and look out to see if maybe the boaters had had an accident or something, when my whole tent lit up. The light slowly panned across me and onto the tent my girls were in that immediately made them quiet. In a normal volume, I was able to tell them to stay absolutely still. The light panned back to my tent and then over to theirs again. I could only guess that it must have been some sort of boat with a searchlight on it. After an eternity that was really only about 5 minutes, the light turned off, and I heard the motor engage and fade as the boat drove away from us. I immediately found the satellite phone and called our camp director, who gave us the phone number for the local police. I called them, and they said they would forward the information I gave to the local native detachment on Bear Island. I don't think any of us slept that night, and I got up at 5 a.m. to take my canoe out and take a look around. I thought maybe someone had fallen overboard and had managed to swim to shore. Obviously, I didn't find anyone, and there was nothing floating in the water either, although it is a pretty deep body of water. None of us wanted to camp one more night, so I called the camp and had them head out to the pickup point a day early. We paddled like hell and didn't really talk much. I think none of us really wanted to speculate about what we might have heard and what would have happened if we'd made a noise or moved when that light was on our tents. I've thought about this a lot over the years, but whenever I've told people the story, they've been quite skeptical. I recently started looking into missing persons cases in the area, but without much luck. If anyone reading this is familiar with Indigenous issues in Canada, though, there is an epidemic of missing and murdered Indigenous women, and these causes usually go unreported or unsolved.
I've lived in New York City all my life, and I have countless stories that I can tell you about this city, but this one takes the cake for sure. I live in one of the safest and most affluent neighborhoods in all of Brooklyn, near the Verrazano Bridge. My friends and I, being high school students at the time, would use fake IDs to get into this college bar in Manhattan most weekends. There is one train line that serves my neighborhood, and even then it's a decent walk to get to the nearest station. On this night, my friends and I left our neighborhood and boarded the train. Everything was totally fine on the way to the bar. It's one straight shot ride there. And we had a pretty decent time. I left the bar at around 3 in the morning, and my friends decided that they would all stay at one of my friend's grandparents' house in the neighborhood next to mine, as to not get caught by their parents, which was served by a different train line. We boarded the train headed toward my neighborhood, but my friends disembarked about 7 or 8 stations before I needed to get off so that they could transfer to the other train line. As I said before, my neighborhood is very affluent and most people don't use the subway and opt for cars instead. It's semi-urban. Imagine a mix of New Jersey and a scene out of Saturday Night Fever. Therefore, I was the only person in my car. 2 stops after my friends left the train, a man wearing a stuffed black backpack entered the car and sat down in one of the corner seats next to an advertisement plastered on the wall. I paid little attention to him, but anyone boarding the train at 3 a.m. in my area would be kind of unnerving, especially because of his shabby appearance. Not homeless, but he definitely had not showered for a few days. My eyes stayed glued to my phone for about 5 minutes until my attention was ripped away from AFK Arena due to the man removing a large permanent marker from his backpack. He began writing on the advertisement and smiling at me every so often, as if he wanted me to acknowledge whatever he was scribbling down. The man began by drawing a hanged man with several religious crosses surrounding him, and then began to write phrases on the advertisement. The end is near, you will pay for your sins, the awakening is upon us, etc., etc. Normal things for a super religious person to say or write, even if it was unnerving that this was happening at 3 a.m. in an empty train car. I tried to shrug off the situation because I didn't want to freak myself out, as I tend to overthink things like this. However, the next time I looked up at the advertisement, he had written, "Make sure you check behind you on your way home," and gave me that unnerving smile once more. At this point, I freaked out. I was still semi-drunk, and my anxiety disorder was not helping anything to the situation at hand. I got up and moved to the opposite end of the car. My station was next, so I thought I was just dealing with some loony and that I'd be fine. As I exited the train, the man exited as well. Now here's where I really felt like I was in danger. He was following me with a blank face. No smile, no making sure that I was paying attention to his actions, just blank. I began briskly walking through my silent neighborhood. No one was out. It was 3 a.m. for crying out loud. The man trailed behind me with his backpack my entire way home, and I made sure to double lock my doors once I got inside. I didn't tell my mom because I knew she would have had 10 times the panic attack that I did on the train. When I entered my room, I peered out the window. There the man was, staring blankly at my front door. He stood there for about 5 minutes before leaving, trailing off into the darkness. I have no idea what the man wanted from me, or why he followed me off of the train. To this day, I still make myself believe that he was simply deranged or had some sort of mental illness, not that he had any sinister intentions. Weird stalker Bible freak on the subway? Let's not meet again.
A little about me. I'm a personal trainer, and I share a space in an office that also has an acupuncturist and a chiropractor. Usually they operate during the day, and I will go around 7 or 8 at night to work out and do heavy lifting, so their clients don't have to hear metal clinking or banging in another room. As a preface, every once in a while, the door will unlock and a cleaning person will come in. The door will chime and they will clean and leave. The family that cleans the building is Hispanic. Usually a taller man who is very nice will clean our office, and a woman, I assume is his wife, will walk around with a trash bag and pick up the other buildings in the area. Tonight was the usual routine. Go to the office, drop off some paperwork, and squeeze in an evening workout. I'm putting away some stuff and printing off a few things, and I hear the door unlock. The door is older, and it makes a very distinct clicking sound when the key turns in it. The door chimes and a man comes in, asking me in Spanish if he can come in. I don't speak Spanish, and he repeats in English, "Can I come inside?" Of course, I think it's one of the members of the family to come clean, and I say yes. It isn't until 10 minutes later, after I go to throw away something, I notice the trash is still there, and the man is just sitting in front of the door. I don't want to be rude, but I didn't understand why, On a Sunday night at 8:30 p.m., this guy is just sitting here in the office alone with me. I text the chiropractor and I tell her what's going on, to which she calls me immediately and says, "You need to leave. There is a button on the alarm to notify the police. Do you want me to come over?" I tell her yes, and I grab my stuff and approach the man. I tell him I'm leaving for the night and turning on the alarm. "So you need to leave." He looks at me, shakes his head, and says no very firmly. I freeze up, thankful that I still have someone on the phone. I say, "Why are you here?" He mumbles something along the lines of, "I am on probation." I tell him that the office isn't for probation, and in my mind I'm thinking, why would someone be reporting to an officer at 8:30 p.m. on a Sunday? The office is holistic. We have Buddhas and incense around. It says Oriental medicine on the door. He stands up and blocks the door. He starts asking what the office really is, and I tell him it's for an acupuncturist and other specialities. As I type this, I wonder why he cared to know. It wasn't for probation. Why would he care so much to know what the office was? I wonder if I made a mistake in telling him. He then pulls out his phone and begins to scroll through it. He says he doesn't know the address and maybe I can help him, suggesting I walk over to peer at his phone. I tell him I can't help him and he needs to leave. He scrolls for 5 minutes on his phone, and at this point, I'm hoping the chiropractor will get here soon. He holds his phone up at me and shows me a random list of 20 to 30 addresses. I tell him, maybe what you're looking for is across the street, but not here. You need to leave. He seems hesitant to leave, but finally turns around and walks out slowly. As soon as he gets outside, I lock the door. I guess it doesn't matter because this man somehow had a key and got in, but I locked the door as soon as I could. It was only then I noticed there was a van parked in front of my car outside. This man gets in the passenger side, so he isn't alone. I decide to wait until the car leaves before I get into my own car. The way they parked, it would only take them backing up 5 feet to box me into the space. The van is huge with suicide doors on the back, and it then proceeds to wait for 15 minutes before slowly pulling out. It stops in front of the office, as if they're taking one last look at the building, and slowly pulls off. I wait, and notice that they only pulled up 50 feet, just out of my sight. They are still there, and I can barely see the headlights. It's like they're waiting for something. Thankfully, the chiropractor pulled up in her car in time, and the van was gone. The whole experience was unreal. I can't seem to wrap my head around it. The fact that the man came in with a key and acted like he was there for probation doesn't make sense. It doesn't make sense at all. The fact he wanted to know what the office really was and he blocked the door is also bizarre. A few weeks ago, when I was moving equipment into the space, I felt like I was being watched. I ended up burning some sage and thought maybe I was just paranoid about being in a new space at night. But now, I'm wondering if there was something I was picking up on and didn't know it yet. I will keep this updated as things progress. Hopefully that man doesn't come back in, and hopefully we get a security camera installed and the locks changed.
For background information, I'm a female on a volunteer fire department, and this happened a few years ago when I was 20. During our drills at my former department, our bay doors were left open, so people have been known to walk by and talk to us, ask us questions, or just look at the trucks. One evening, this dude, 23 male, strolls by. A fellow firefighter from another town, which isn't uncommon. Firemen stop by other departments all the time when in town. He made his rounds and was talking to my chief, my captain, and the young guys, and he made his way over to me and started chatting me up. He was a nice guy and good looking enough. We exchanged Snapchats, and it didn't take long to figure out what a psycho he was. After a week of talking, he messaged me saying, "So how come you didn't swipe right?" Confused, I asked him what he meant, and then this unfolded. He told me all of this in an attempt to impress me with how devoted he was. He found me on a dating app, used my picture from the dating app to find my Facebook since in my photo I'm wearing a uniform that had my last name. That was definitely my bad. He then used my profile picture to find out what fire department I was on by looking closely at the fire truck in the background. He told me he walked by my department almost every day to see when we drilled and to spot me. As he's telling me this, I'm confused as heck, and he goes, "I'm having a pretty rough day, if I can come over." Cue to him telling me he's on his way. He used my Snapchat location to find my work and house. My location on everything is now off. When he came to my house, he brought a love letter and gifts. He said he was sorry and confused and just really wanted things to work out. I told him that he needed to leave and never speak to me again, to which he obliged by leaving, saying if that would make me happy. He made maybe 3 to 4 new Snapchat and Facebook profiles in an attempt to add me back. At one point, he got clever and made his Snapchat username Chris Smith 1990, which made me go, "Hey, it's my friend Chris Smith." Lo and behold, it was not Chris Smith. Once I realized it wasn't my friend, but instead the psycho, he asked what he could do to make it up. I texted "get lost and go set yourself on fire." I then got a video of him walking into the woods, and then he set himself on fire. He flickered a lighter over his hand, and I thought, yeah, haha, okay. And then his entire hand and arm lit up, followed by screams and a cutout. I started to freak out, thinking, well shit, and immediately got a photo of the hairs on his knuckles burnt off in his burnt shirt. He was okay, and coated his arm in something flammable, but something that wouldn't actually damage him. Blocked again. He finally gave up after coming to my house again, and I had a gun in my hand and told him to stop or the cops would be involved. But to be fair, it wasn't loaded. I didn't know how to use it and was planning on swinging the thing if it got really bad. So, crazy stalker who set himself ablaze? Let's not meet. I don't know what compelled me to finally share this, but I have been thinking about it a lot the last few days, and thought it'd fit in the sub relatively well. I'm one of those longtime lurkers who has been sitting on their story for ages, but I finally got around to writing my experience down and hope someone out there finds this interesting to read. When I was about 8 years old, my parents were going through a divorce, and me and my older sister used to spend a lot of time at our grandparents' house. It's a long ranch-style home on a corner in a very nice neighborhood that's a 10-minute walk from a gas station, grocery store, and a few fast food restaurants. The streets are long and lined with well-manicured houses cradled by big scenic California valley hills all around. We were never very wealthy, but my grandpa bought it as a fixer-upper many years ago, and the property value has skyrocketed since then. As you can imagine, it's a very safe spot, and although there weren't many kids in the neighborhood, it wasn't uncommon to see neighbors walking their dogs or pushing a stroller down the sidewalk outside of our house. Although my mom was especially protective all our lives, this particular neighborhood was densely populated, and my family knew just about everyone who lived there. She grew up in that neighborhood herself, so she was understandably trusting. She would once in a while let me and my sister walk to the Rotten Robbie gas station on the other end of the block to grab a snack. I would always get a ring pop, and my sister would grab a Three Musketeers before we made our way back home. My sister was about 11 at the time, and this small amount of freedom was a really big deal to us. Nothing compared to walking down that street all by ourselves in the summertime, laughing and joking around, a couple dollar bills in our pockets. I felt like I owned the world. The one oddity I ever noticed around the neighborhood was a small camper parked on the side of the road opposite to the gas station, right along the backside of the fence of another house. It sat there in the shade like a permanent fixture, all the windows constantly covered by opaque beige curtains. I can't explain why, but it always gave me this deep sense of foreboding when I'd pass it. I was almost positive someone was living inside of it because, at times, I'd hear the air conditioning running as it sat stagnant in that same spot. The hairs on the back of my neck would always stand on end as I passed it. particularly as I passed the camper door, and I'd always keep an eye on it for fear that one day it'd swing open just as I came to pass by. I think what bothered me the most was a drawing taped to the door from the inside. It was extremely messy, a sketch of odd lines in a brown-colored pencil that was frustratingly indescribable. I could see the outline of something, a vague shape, but could never make out what it was intended to be. I never had the nerve to stop and stare long enough to really investigate, but each time I walked by, I'd steal a glance. A year prior to the incident I'm about to describe, I was walking with my mom past the camper in the shade. We had just gotten to the park nearby and unfortunately had to pass the camper before we could cross the street and continue walking. I didn't want to seem afraid, so I kept on walking right behind her and didn't object when she walked past it. This time I felt a little more brave. I was frustrated not being able to decipher the drawing for so long, and while my mom was feet away, I stopped in front of the camper door and took a moment to really look at the drawing. Upon closer inspection, the paper was filthy. I remember doing a project in elementary school where we soaked printer paper in black coffee to make it look aged, and that's what it reminded me of. My mom walked on without noticing I'd stopped following her, but my eyes stayed fixed on the indistinct mass of dirt-caked scribbles until I could make out what looked to be a tiny, malformed face. My stomach turned. I immediately felt cold and disgusted as my eyes trailed over the rest of the image. I didn't know what kind of creature it was at the time, but now I can look back and say the drawing was a badly deformed fetus, inside a mass of large, perfect circles like those made by a circular ring ruler. Its face was contorted as if in pain. It was so graphically disturbing and seemed to portray this odd sense of suffering that stuck with me for days. As a child, I didn't know how to process it, and the mental image still makes me sick to think about. I'd never seen anything like it before. Adrenaline flooded my body and my chest hurt with fear, but I selfishly thought of my glorious little trips for ring pops and said absolutely nothing as I followed behind my mom. This was, in retrospect, a classically terrible idea. It's one of those things you scream at main characters in movies for. Ever since my ill feelings towards the camper had been elevated by the drawing on the door, I thought about it every time we drove by, and about a month later, my mom once again graced us with several bucks and permission to walk down to Rotten Robbie and grab our respective snacks. I thought about telling my sister what I'd seen on the way there, but she was older and braver, and I was terrified she'd make me cross the street with her to check it out. It was a bright, sunny day, and I told myself with false certainty that nothing was going to happen. If I didn't acknowledge it, maybe it'd go away. We walked past the camper, and it was thankfully uneventful. On the walk back, I was feeling more comfortable and was focused on fighting open my candy wrapper while my sister walked alongside me. We passed the camper a second time, but I didn't give it half as much thought as the first time. I don't remember what we were talking about, but I recall being interrupted mid-sentence as my sister softly yet firmly said my name. There was a distinct fear in her voice that immediately set me on edge, like a bucket of ice water. All my senses heightened, and I became aware of everything, including the sound of haphazard footsteps about 10 feet behind us. It was accompanied by a heavy rustling sound like a heavy backpack, and nervously I half turned my head to look. A man with a long, unkempt beard and wearing many layers of ragged clothes stood behind us, eyes unmistakably burning into our backs as he walked. His movements weren't normal. It was a drunken shuffle, like each of his feet were unimaginably heavy and needed to be moved one grand effort at a time. His shoulders were skewed, head tilted downward with a strange arc of his neck. I could hear his shoes scraping the gravel with every step, but rather than seemingly genuinely intoxicated, it was as if he was intentionally meandering our direction like a zombie with a direct effort to frighten us. Behind him, I saw the camper door was wide open for the first time in all the years we'd spent living there, and realized this was the man who had been living inside. "He's following us," I choked out, my eyes filling with tears. My mind was spinning as I stared straight ahead again, the wide street and sidewalks abnormally empty all around. My sister grabbed my hand. She squeezed it hard enough to hurt without looking my way, speaking carefully under her breath. "On the count of 3, we race home," she told me in a very serious tone of voice. I couldn't reply with a growing lump in my throat, but every single cell in my body understood we had to put some distance between us and this man as quickly as possible. She began to count steadily while we walked faster, and the most terrifying part is that he started running before we even had a chance to. He must have heard her directions to me and tried to get a head start by sprinting our direction before she got to 3. But his footsteps were noisy and we bolted like deer the instant we heard him behind us. I'll never forget it. The chase felt exactly like you imagine in your nightmares. The fear your pursuer is inches away from grabbing your arm or a fistful of your hair. I pictured myself being dragged into the van with nobody around to see or hear me. We ran so fast we didn't even have the breath to scream, and peering back behind me about 10 seconds later, I saw him running our direction with absolutely none of the impairment he showed with those zombie-like steps moments before. I think back on it now, and he may have been deliberately pretending to be handicapped to lower our guard so we wouldn't start running. The thought is terrifying, but I can't rationalize it any other way. We made it to our grandparents' house, and without even looking behind us, yanked open the stubborn old door before slamming it closed and scrambling past their excited dogs to get as deep in the house as possible. I don't even think we locked it, as our main goal was getting within the line of sight of any adults as quickly as possible. My mom was talking to my grandpa at the table and gave us an amused look when we bounded into the living room. Since we were kids, running around wasn't anything out of the ordinary, and she didn't ask what happened as we collapsed on the couch and tried to catch our breath. The inside of the house felt so safe and felt in such good spirits that I didn't even want to bring up what had just happened. Like waking up from a nightmare, you didn't want to talk about it. I was desperate to go back to normalcy. I wanted to forget it entirely, to unwrap my candy and act like everything was completely normal for the sake of my own sanity, and that's exactly what I did. I asked my sister a few years back if she remembered this incident. I'm 25 and she's 28 now, and her response was strange. She remembered immediately without the need for me to provide details, but she quickly waved it off and insisted he had to have been a bored homeless man and looking to spook some kids walking home with no real intent to harm anyone. I don't know, I'd like to believe it's some innocent misunderstanding, but like they always say about gut feelings, they're rarely wrong. I feel in my soul that he wanted to hurt me and my sister that day. I never told her or anyone else about the strange drawing on the door, and I'm not sure if my sister saw the open door and connected him to the camper or not. It's one of my biggest regrets, as I would hate for any other children to have been less fortunate after innocently walking past the camper in the shade. I believe he may have chosen the spot between the park and the gas station deliberately due to the number of children walking around the area. I never saw the camper again a day or so after this. I'm not proud of how I handled this and would encourage anyone who finds themselves in a similar situation to contact authorities immediately for the safety of others around. I don't know if this whole story comes off as melodramatic, but it was very real and very frightening in a way I can't forget. So, possibly deranged camper guy by the gas station, whatever your intent was, let's not meet. Short background story. I, 24-year-old female, have been dating my boyfriend since I was 15. The first 6 years of our relationship had been kind of long distance. I used to go visit him on the weekends, and it would take me around 2 hours by bus plus train to reach the station where he would come pick me up. The story takes place when I was 18, so I was quite used to public transportation by then, and I was aware of the creeps and weirdos one would encounter while traveling. Nothing really creepy had ever happened to me, apart from the usual stares and unsolicited, "Hello, beautiful." One Saturday morning, I got on the usual train for the last 15 to 20 minutes of my trip, after traveling for about an hour and a half by bus. I always tended to sit either close to other girls or to families with children. This one time, the train carriage was quite empty, so I sat across from a guy with flamingos on his t-shirt and a laptop. I don't really remember who the other people in our carriage were. That seat just looked like the safest one. Shortly after the departure, another guy entered the carriage and sat down next to me. He looked to be around 25 to 30 years old. He was wearing some dirty old clothes and he smelled like sweat and possibly booze. He said hi, and I said hi. As I wrote before, I was quite used to weirdos talking to me on the buses and trains, so I didn't immediately feel like I was in danger. In my experience, it was usually better to engage on a short and meaningless conversation than to ignore them completely. He asked what my name was, and I made one up. Then he asked why I was traveling all alone, and I said my boyfriend was waiting for me at the following station. I hoped this would be enough to make him desist, but I was so wrong. He started telling me that he had just gotten a new phone and he had lost all of his friends' numbers. He asked me to give him my number so he'd have someone to talk to at night. I politely declined. At that point, I was starting to feel very uncomfortable, but my stop was only 5 to 10 minutes away, and I still thought he was going to give up and leave. He insisted on me giving him my phone number and started getting closer to me. At this point, I stopped answering his questions and looked in the opposite direction. This must have bothered him because he suddenly put his dirty hand on my thigh to get my attention. I was terrified, but I managed to utter a shaky, "Don't touch me." I wish I had yelled it, but I didn't, and no one in the carriage noticed what was going on. Not even the flamingo guy who was literally in front of us, or maybe he noticed and didn't care at first. The guy didn't take his hands off of me, and I was petrified. I don't remember if he said something else at that point because I was focused on his hands on my jeans. I gained some more courage and managed to tell him to leave me alone in a slightly louder voice. I guess that some people started looking in our direction in that moment because he suddenly got up and left. I started crying for the relief as soon as he exited the carriage. The flamingo guy asked if I was okay and if I needed to call someone. I said I was fine. I tried to call my boyfriend, but he didn't answer because he was driving to come pick me up. I thought it was over. The train started slowing down and I got up in order to get off. Little did I know that the creepy guy was most probably keeping an eye on me from the window of the carriage door after he left. I got off the train and started to look around, hoping to see my boyfriend, who would sometimes wait for me on the platform. At that point, I noticed that the guy had stepped off the train as well. As soon as we made eye contact, he started walking towards me. I felt my heart drop. I turned around and started walking quickly towards the stairs, hoping he would lose me in the crowd. As soon as I reached the underground corridor, I started running. I got to the other side of the tunnel. I ran up the stairs and towards the restrooms. I don't know why I didn't run to the main hall instead. I was panicking and I just went for the first place that came to my mind. I locked myself into one of the cubicles, made sure it was closed, and then got up on the toilet so he wouldn't see my feet. I was wearing a pair of quite recognizable boots. 20 to 30 seconds later, I heard someone come in and hastily try all the door handles. Of course, it could have been anyone, but I'm convinced it was him. It just made no sense for anyone else to try to open all the doors like that. I remember feeling my heartbeat in my throat while I was waiting for him to leave. I remained still and silent for what felt like ages until I heard him walk away. At that point, I started crying again and finally managed to call my boyfriend and tell him I was locked in one of the toilet stalls. When he got there and I came out of the stall, I was shaking uncontrollably, but he somehow managed to calm me down. When we got out of the restrooms, there was no sign of the guy, and I never saw him again. Looking back now, I know I should have reported him to the authorities, but I stupidly thought that they wouldn't believe me or that they were going to shrug it off as not a big deal. After all, nothing really bad had happened on the train, and I had no proof that it was him trying to open the stall doors. This experience made me avoid trains for a while, even though after some time I managed to overcome my fear. Please, creepy guy on the train, let's not ever meet again. I was a high school student living with my mother in a third-floor apartment. I used to sleep in the living room because the apartment only had one bedroom and it was my mom's. I was happy with that little space I had. I was a happy kid. I always got up at 6 a.m. to go to school, and my mom always got up at 5 a.m. to have time to shower and make breakfast before dropping me at school and heading to work. That morning, I woke up and the lights were all on. Every single one of them, even the one in my room. I went to grab my phone and it wasn't there. Odd. I headed to the bathroom and saw all the drawers and doors of every furniture we had were open. I was deeply confused. Anyways, my mom came out of the bathroom and asked me what the hell I've been doing. I told her that I didn't know what she was talking about, and that I thought she had done it since she was always up an hour earlier than me. I also asked if she had seen my cell phone. Then I saw it, deep inside her green eyes, the realization. I could see the fear and all the pieces inside her head clicking into place. She leaped to the kitchen and found the window wide open, a kitchen knife on the ground, and some dusty fingerprints on the wall where someone put weight on to climb inside. It was then when my sleepy head put the pieces together too. Someone, somehow, climbed all the way up our balcony, got inside the apartment and robbed us, all while I was asleep in my bed right there in the living room. She hugged me and asked me if I was okay. I said I never heard anything, didn't even wake up when this unknown person turned the lights on and rummaged through our stuff. It was super weird. I've been the lightest sleeper since I could remember. They didn't dare to open my mom's bedroom door, so she didn't notice anything. My grandma says that some angel protected me in my sleep, and that's why I didn't wake up. But I don't believe in that stuff. I don't think they knew I was there either. Police never found the robber, and we put steel bars on the window. We moved anyways sometime after that. This happened when I was still in high school, and at least 6 years have passed. My mother and I moved from that apartment, and now I'm growing up and living with my boyfriend. But until today, I'm still paranoid and keep thinking, why didn't I wake up? Though I am grateful that I didn't.